Hey, it is Mike and Matt's X-Cellent Adventures episode 7, our 7th X-Men film. We are still doing this somehow, some way. Before I bring my co-host Mike Thomas in, I do just want to say a quick thing about Suicide Squad. This is a very dated reference if you're listening to this in, say, a few months' time. But Suicide Squad has just come out. It notoriously got really, really bad reviews. It has scared a lot of people, including my co-host. I've seen the film, and I just want to say, if you've been scared away from this film by reviews, ignore that. I think you should see it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's an amazing film, but it is not in any way deserving of the level of criticism it's taken. First half of it, I think, is really good. It falls apart a bit as it goes on, but I could sit here and name you about 20 worse superhero movies than it. So if you're even remotely curious and reviews turned you off, I would say just go see it. I don't think it's a waste of anyone's money. Anyway, that's out of the way. I'm Matt Waters. I am joined by Mike Thomas. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, beyond the shade you just threw at me right there in that intro, but I'm going to adapt and adjust, and I'll be okay.
Okay, if you are any time not feeling like you're going to be okay, just let me know, and we can just pause this podcast. Like, no one needs to know. We'll talk through it. I'll get you through it. We'll get you back to your regular self. Because I'm here for you, man. Like a team, like an X-Man team. We are in this together.
Yes. Much like the X-Men. We are together forever, except in every movie where they get divided.
Well, yeah, I mean, how are they going to have conflict unless they fall out at some point?
Alright. Days of Future Past. Not a lot to talk about here. Pretty straightforward movie.
Yeah, it's very simple, not a lot going on. Small character piece, not many characters.
This is a very good movie. This is unquestionably a good movie. And possibly even more impressive that it was pulled off in the first place. This kind of solidified the X-Men franchise once again on steady ground after, about 9 years of tumult. This was a nice movie to revisit because it reminded me of how happy I was when I left the theater.
Yeah, definitely. This was a crazy, crazy thing for them to have pulled off. Obviously, the X-Men was once at a very high height. It fell to a very low low. It went back up a little bit, and then Wolverine was very boring. And yet they somehow managed, in the midst of Marvel, like really firing on all cylinders, releasing the Avengers, billion-dollar movie after billion-dollar movie, releasing arguably the best of the whole of their whole series, Captain America: Winter Soldier. We get X-Men: Days of Future Past, the Avengers of the X-Men franchise, if you will.
Yeah, and as you said, at this point, Marvel. This probably will end up being 2014 will probably end up being the best year Marvel ever has, because between Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy, I doubt they'll be able to release two movies in the same year that reach the heights those two did ever again. So X-Men, whether they knew it or not at the time, like this movie had to deliver. Otherwise, we would have another Sony situation on our hands where Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes out this year and largely falls flat, and people do not care for it all that much, and it pretty much kills Sony's sole investment or sole ownership of Spider-Man. So this movie had to deliver, and it thankfully did, despite pretty much the smallest margin of error possible. I mean, there was no reason for this movie to work out well.
Yeah, I mean, they're bringing back the old cast, as in the X-Men 1 to 3 minus Cyclops and Jean Grey cast. We are bringing back Iceman, we're bringing back Storm, bringing back Colossus against all possible odds. More importantly, we're bringing back Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, and we are merging them with our new cast of Michael Fassbender, James McAvoy, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, and the glue that binds everything in the entire universe together, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Lucas. Not Lucas, no. Hugh Jackman in his 7th outing as Wolverine, which is an insane feat. Yeah, so they're merging two casts together, and I mean, there aren't a huge amount of stars in that original. I mean, obviously, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are huge stars. Hugh Jackman's a big star. Halle Berry's a big star. But the people I mentioned, such as Iceman, that level of people they're not like huge stars, but still seeing that entire enormous cast together.
Yes, they're significant.
Yeah, was impressive, and like marching this cast out at Comic-Con, seeing them all sitting in a row like that, I was like, whoa. I think until Avengers 3 comes out and they trot all their people out at once, this has got to be the most impressive superhero cast ever assembled.
Yeah, it's I mean, I remember I think they announced this movie in 2012, and I was just, wow. I just remember thinking, like, this seems like the most difficult movie to pull off possible, but I was so excited for the possibility that they could kind of redeem the original franchise, or the original trilogy, so to speak, and they basically did that. Like, I came into this movie, I legit remember saying, the person I was sitting next to, I said to them, okay, I want this movie to be, first off, good, because we need more good X-Men movies. I want them to essentially erase the Last Stand from existence, and I want to see Cyclops and Jean Grey. Like those are the three things I was looking for from this movie, and they hit all three of them. So it's just a nice movie. It's an important movie in the X-Men franchise, possibly the most important in terms of getting it back on track firmly. Like, you know, with First Class could have gone in a lot of different directions, and like First Class you could easily see First Class being like an anomaly. Like, okay, like they accidentally made another good movie, but this signals that X-Men is back in the good graces of fans everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And for as good as those earlier films are, you know, this one made $720 million, and you know, it's now showing that X-Men can trade punches with the huge Marvel machine. Obviously, they are behind, but they've got less to play with, arguably. But, I mean, those first three predated the big Marvel Hollywood monster, so they were kind of easy to ignore, and then they sort of faltered a bit while this was going on. And then here comes Days of Future Past, very respectable amount of money to take home, and it says X-Men's here to stay. You know, we don't need to sell X-Men back to Marvel. We can do this by ourselves.
It's also just a fun movie, too, which is something that I think Bryan Singer really got about X-Men, that you can take it seriously, but it should also, like, make you laugh and smile all throughout.
Yeah, of course. Bryan Singer, everyone's favorite child molester, is back.
Yes. Actually, this is where the story of him being a child rapist really actually took off, because there was a lawsuit filed in regards to it shortly before the publicity campaign was rolled out. So he actually pulled out of the publicity campaign as to not distract from the movie itself, which was what it was. Yeah, it's a shame that he's probably an awful person in real life, because he's really good at making X-Men movies. And him coming back to the franchise, despite the moral issues involved, has been probably a blessing more than anything else.
Yeah, he's returned to save us from mediocrity, and well, obviously First Class is very good, but yeah, he's back. Simon Kinberg is writing again. I feel how I feel about him, but I mean, as a writer of a script, I think he's fine. There's story help here from Matthew Vaughn and Jane Goldman again, although I think it's more they picked up what was their intended sequel to First Class and made it their own thing, but either way.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a handy little plot summary for us? Because this is a pretty confusing one.
Yeah. I deliberated about how simple to make this. But so essentially, this is based on the very famous story of the same name, X-Men Days of Future Past. So in the future, the scary, scary future that is getting increasingly depressingly close, 2023, mutants are hunted by Sentinels and rounded up into concentration camps. Everything is glowing and Tron and neon. It's pretty cool.
And to be more specific, I mean, like, the Sentinels have taken over the world, basically.
Yes.
That's what. Like, it's not just like mutants, like they're hunting. They've just kind of taken over everything.
Well, they don't really show it, but it's like on behalf of humans. Like,
yeah, but like, you don't. Like, it's not, especially in the original cut, it's not even entirely clear how much of a role humans play in this world anymore.
Yeah, I guess that is a downfall of it, that we never see the human side to this of the oppression in the future. You only see it in the past. It does look like the Sentinels run the Earth, but anyway. So yeah, they discover there's a way to send someone back in time And because Wolverine can heal, his brain can handle the process of going back many, many decades. And they send him back into his 1973 body in order to prevent this future from ever taking place. And while he is in the past, Kitty Pryde, who is the person that can inexplicably do this, she has to keep him safely in that mental state while whatever is coming for them. So everyone else is holed up in this Chinese temple, trying to stop Sentinels from brutally murdering them all. So Logan has to recruit the younger version of Xavier, Beast, and Magneto in order to track down Mystique and stop her from assassinating Bolivar Trask, who designed the Sentinels in the first place, because her killing him was the catalyst that led to the government approving of Sentinels, and also they used her DNA because she can change her appearance to create these scary future Sentinels that can change their powers and whatnot. That's the version of the Sentinels that have wiped everyone out. So they, lots of stuff happens, essentially. And they do initially succeed, but then Magneto goes rogue. He takes control of the Sentinels. He leads an attack on the White House. He almost kills the president. But Mystique intervenes only to herself, almost kill Trask again. And then as the Sentinels in the future are just about to kill everybody, Xavier talks Mystique down, and she doesn't kill him, and everything goes back to a lovely, happy future where Wolverine is walking down the corridors. He sees lots of familiar faces, including our favourite, Scott Marston as Cyclops, Jean Grey's there as well, Kelsey Grammer. Everything's lovely and nice, and then at the end we get a tease for Apocalypse.
Yes. Where should we start?
I mean, it's an enormous cast.
Yeah,
I think we have to start with the cast because I think that is a lot of what is so good about it, that inexplicably with such a huge cast, they do make this thing work.
Yeah, I think they do that mostly by taking a lot of shortcuts with the old cast in that they don't do much with them, but their mere presence adds weight and gravity to the situation. And then focus basically only on 4 characters in the 1973 timeline. Or I guess 5 characters. Because, right away, we start off in the future in 2023. So, you have Xavier, Magneto, Storm, and Wolverine meet up with a group of younger mutants being led by Iceman, Kitty Pryde, and Bishop. And with Iceman, you kind of you know who he is. He's boring. He's a candy-ass. And he loves the women. I don't know what else you could say about him as a character. You don't really know much about Kitty Pryde. You know nothing about Bishop, and then you just have a bunch of faceless characters who do a bunch of cool things with their powers. You don't need to do a big arc for Magneto, Xavier, or Storm. Thankfully, you don't need to do one for Storm. And they don't even bother doing anything with all those other characters, other than establishing that a few of them are still alive. And once again, we'll position all the people of color in this wonderful metaphor for oppressing minorities in the background who just do a bunch of cool shit and die when it's convenient to save everybody. And that's kind of it. So it gives the illusion that there's this huge monster cast, but so few characters actually have meaningful arcs in the movie that it's an effective illusion, but it's still an illusion all the same. Did anyone in the future besides Wolverine have anything significant to truly do?
In terms of character and pathos, not really, but I
like Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart have a few moments. Definitely, Stewart gets a beautiful scene with his younger self in some weird that. They use that scene in a lot of the trailers, and you can tell why. It's just a haunting, beautiful moment. And Ian McKellen gets his share. He gets to be Glib a few times. He gets to be Ian McKellen, and that works because he's so talented and so beloved. But they don't give anything to Storm, not even in the extended cut, which I was kind of shocked by. Colossus, I don't think, has a single line, not that we needed one. Iceman, it's just kind of a familiar face. Kitty Pryde, kind of a familiar face in the sense that she was only in one other movie, and now she has basically, her power has inexplicably evolved into a time travel power. And like I said, all the new mutants there are just, they're not actual characters. They're objects, they're scenery, they're not characters in any way. So it's weird. So I agree that it's this crazy cast of familiarity, but it's not a crazy cast in terms of actual writing, and it's not a well written cast in that way. It's a smartly written cast because they narrow everything down to what you really need, but it's just weird. I don't know how they pulled it off.
Okay, let's tackle it this way. Let's talk about the future, people, and then we'll talk about the past.
Yeah.
Because the meat of the film does take place in the past.
Yeah.
What I'll say is, I think the coolest stuff in this whole movie is all the future stuff, which is weird because they're the worst actors. They're the people that arguably helped drive it into the ground. And as you said, most of them have very little actual character stuff to do. But the opening scene with all the portals and stuff, like, blink immediately, fan bing bing. Someone who made this film played the game Portal, obviously, and thought, let's rip that off, but with a much bigger budget. And they did, and it's visually amazing. I think the Sentinel fights and the way they use Blink's powers in combination with other people is some of the best action scenes, there have ever been in superhero films. Like, some of the shots are insane, like with 3 portals going at once and Sentinels jumping through, and it's crazy. I love it.
It's interesting how when Bryan Singer gets to mess with space and time, it really brings out the best in his action sensibilities. Like, he can't just direct a good action scene. Like, compare this to the scene with the Sentinels in the past at the end of the movie, like that climactic battle. Like, he doesn't know what to do with it. And nothing significant happens in that action scene in terms of the actual action. But here, it's all over the place. There's this wonderful kinetic feeling to it, and much like actually how the villains, and usually it's the villains have great chemistry with their powers, but here now we finally get to see the good guys using their powers to their fullest abilities. And Blink was probably the most charismatic of all the new characters. She was really able to emote really well, despite the fact I don't think she had a single line in the movie. But all the action is fun. What did you think of the Sentinels, though? The future Sentinels.
They're weird looking, but I get why they did it. I've watched a lot. Okay, so today I have watched the regular film, I've watched the road cut, and I've watched the regular film with the commentary, and a lot of special features. So this is all up in my brain right now. They said they wanted them to look like Mystique and be all sort of graceful and scaly, and I don't agree with them. We'll get into the whole Mystique being how they can do what they do thing. But in terms of cohesion with your vision, it makes sense. And I do like that they just mess them up completely. As much as I love these characters, watching them all get murdered in brutal ways is really, really fun. Yeah,
it's there's definitely, they build them up so well in the beginning as being this unstoppable fighting force that when they show up and there's appears to be 2,000 of them at the very end, you're like, they're dead. Yeah. There's no
Well, that's the whole point. We've had these sort of big threats before, but the X-Men are always okay. And they're showing you a world where even the X-Men are completely screwed. And they are having to keep on the move. They are in small numbers. A lot of people we know and love are dead. They have it's not shown in the main film, it's in the road cut. They have a wall with pictures of dead allies and loved ones and whatnot. It's just, it's a really effective, bleak thing, and showing, we can't fight this, we need to avert it from ever happening.
It's to a point where it makes you wonder how any of them have survived up until this point. That's how dominating they are. Which might be a step too far, to be honest with you. What use would Xavier be in this type of world where there's just a bunch of robots?
If we assume that the Sentinels, and thus the humans that control them, control all traditional forms of tech, then how else are you going to communicate at long range?
I guess that's a fair point. I remember watching this scene in the theaters, and the first few times I rewatched it, the original cut, I think the opening portion of the movie in the future, all the dialogue feels very weird to me and not smooth. I accepted that to be the best part of the movie in some ways, just being with these characters again. And there was just this choppiness to it that I feel was explained immediately when I watched the road cut last night, because the original portion of the movie is probably at least a third as long as it was in the theaters. They really let the future scenes breathe a lot more before they go back into the past. And I can understand for pacing reasons why they'd want to speed that up and not even give token lines to all the new mutants, because, it's not like we suddenly understood them as characters or as people just by them, a handful of them getting one line each. There definitely was, the pacing in the original cut feels very odd and choppy to me. That was always disappointing to me. That I was a little worried, actually. I remember being in the theater, being a little worried, thinking Bryan Singer might have lost it in the 10 years he's been gone. They try to do it seemingly as quickly as possible. Like, we need to let the audience understand what's going on. We need to let them know the stakes of how powerful these mutants are, or these Sentinels are, and then we need to get Wolverine into the past as quickly as possible. And that's the original cut. That's the theatrical cut of the movie. And the road cut's a little bit more slower paced. It lets it breathe a little bit more. What else do you think about the original future scenes?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying. I know I'm kind of lying to myself by saying I actually want a 2-hour movie about this bleak future where they will kill each other, because I know that these are worse actors, some of them, and they don't have a lot of dialogue, and there's not actually a movie to be found in just 2 hours of them getting slaughtered. But viewing it, that was my favourite stuff. So the road cut that we mentioned, it's an extended version of the film, and as you said, it's about just under 20 minutes longer, and most of it is future scenes, and I like that it balanced it out more, because the theatrical cut, you've got, here's the future, here's an hour to an hour and a half of the past, with very little cutting back to that future, and then, oh right, the future again. Whereas this...
Yeah. This felt a little bit more evenly... This felt a little bit more... Like, you definitely need to spend more time in the past in the story as it's constructed, but this one gave the future a little bit more time, and I think... I mean, I definitely prefer the theatrical cut overall, which we'll get into, but I like that the road cut gave the future a little bit more time.
Okay, I wasn't expecting this. I think the road cut is a much better version of the film, but I guess we'll talk about that later.
We should get through the movie first as it is, and then not everyone's seen the road cut. Although probably everyone who's listening to this podcast has seen the road cut, but that's a separate issue.
This is true. Okay, so that's everyone in the future. Iceman has a beard now, and that's indisputable pathos.
He is older, as signified by the beard. He is wiser, as signified by the beard. He's no longer dating Rogue, who in the theatrical cut is presumed dead, and he is now dating Kitty Pryde. Those ice skating lessons really paid off, and that's happening. Ellen Page, I think, does Ellen Page have more lines in this movie than she does in The Last Stand? It's got to be close, at least, right?
Yeah, it felt like it. It probably isn't, but it certainly felt like it.
She's way too good of an actress for this kind of part, but good for her for agreeing to come back.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as we said, when they cast her originally, I think Hard Candy had come out, but I don't think Juno
was not
had.
There.
Yeah. And obviously now, she's not like an A-list megastar, but she's a pretty good get for her kind of actress, for the size of the role they give her.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder what a smaller X-Men movie with Ellen Page in one of the few key roles could do. Because Kitty Pryde is a pretty neat character with some cool powers. With a cool power, so that's one of my big regrets, or what's one of my big problems with the way superhero movies in general are financed, where the bigger franchises, they just demand that every story is so big, and they have to keep going big, and there's so much room for smaller stories to be told with these more popular, better actors than that they could do if they were on TV or whatever.
Yeah, like we were saying with the Wolverine in Japan story, that could have been a very fun Wolverine and Yukio in Japan, like caper, and instead it tries to be this huge X-Men movie.
All right, should we dive into the past? I don't know. Is there anything else in that first future scene we really need to talk about?
No, I think we'll come back to it when we talk about the road cut later. So yeah, the past.
Wolverine is naked. You see his butt. He's got the bone claws again, much to my chagrin. He first recruits Xavier and Beast to the cause, in what is and where we learn that Xavier has forgone his powers to get his legs back, which is basically Beast has created a serum that allows Beast to suppress his powers, but Xavier is taking it in such heavy doses that he no longer has his powers, but he can walk again. Which is kind of a fitting on-the-nose drug metaphor, given that X-Men in general is a super on-the-nose metaphor for oppressing minorities. And, Xavier, I think James McAvoy, considering how put together he portrayed Xavier in the first one, it's kind of remarkable to put his portrayal on the complete other end of the spectrum in terms of being put together and not a complete asshole. McAvoy really just nails this part of the movie. And Beast, it's always struck me as arbitrary, as why is Beast still there? This is this brilliant mind who's decided to be the Alfred to James McAvoy's Bruce Wayne. And I never quite... That always just felt so arbitrary and weird to me. I don't know why. It's probably not fair, but that's how I feel about that. What do you think of Wolverine trying to recruit Xavier and Beast and all that to the cause?
I think from an acting perspective, McAvoy absolutely knocks it out of the park this whole film. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's his best performance of the three movies, and that's not a knock on his other two performances. He just gets... This is his movie. If First Class was Magneto's movie, this is Xavier's movie.
Yeah, they even say that in one of the special features. They say how First Class is a story about how Eric became Magneto. This is a story about how Charles became Professor Xavier, and they give him... He's got more to play with here. He's got more range. Like, he's exploring the sort of darker side of him, and he's got this Born on the 4th of July style, burnt out, disenfranchised thing going on. That's from an acting perspective. I really don't like the idea that this whole serum that fixes his spine, and
it's so dumb.
Yeah.
Every X-Men movie must have one device or one thing in a vial that just has inexplicable, strong scientific capabilities, and it's just... You just got to accept it and move on. Like, that's all they do. That's all they ask us to do.
I mean, did they just think it would move slower if they were having to cart him around in the chair?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of like the idea that... I mean, it's a little on the nose again, but I like the idea that Xavier kind of has to actively choose to be part of this world and be part of the fight for mutant rights again. Like, he can't... He takes so much for granted in the first movie. He's so privileged that this is kind of knocking him down several pegs, and he has to, like, choose to be a part of this world again, which I think is fine. But I'll tell you what though. It's what's so weird. It was nice in First Class and this movie to kind of not have to deal with Xavier in the chair. Like, if you want the character to be an active part of the movie,
that's
like
true.
It's just kind of easier on the story. Like, you don't have to explain why it's possible he's in this scene. Why is he a big part of this superhero team when he can just kind of actively be a part of it. It's not that you can't do other things. It's just that it's kind of nice and easier when he can just do this.
Yeah, and it's difficult because on the one hand, maybe you regret paralyzing him at the end of at the end of First Class, but they didn't know they were going to get an immediate sequel from it, so they kind of had to. So it's dumb, but I've said my piece on it, and we'll move along. He's really good in this. Beast is... I don't like that he alternates. I think this is more bowing to the will of feeling you have to show the person you got, which I don't think makes sense because Nicholas Hoult isn't famous in America in the way he is here. So I think you could have just put him in the Beast suit the whole time, unless that was logistically difficult. I don't like the whole Hulk, Jekyll and Hyde take here where he switches back and forth. I like the idea that he was doomed to his punishment for trying to mess with his own DNA in the last film, and that was how he had to be. But I guess for the sake of easily being able to get around, they had to do it. But I personally don't like that.
Yeah, much like Xavier being able to walk, it feels like erasing significant climactic moments in the first movie for the sake of convenience. As opposed to being good storytelling. And that's just frustrating as a attentive fan to all X-Men movies.
Yes. So that's those three. Wolverine, he's really stupid, kind of. Like, he doesn't seem to grasp the concept of what he's doing. Like, he keeps talking to people as if they should know him when he knows it's the past.
I kind of like that. Like, the idea of Wolverine being this, like, cerebral mastermind does not add up in any way. So...
No, but come on.
I mean, like, this is uncharted territory for him, for humankind in general, so I feel... but yes, it does often just feel like they're reminding the audience at times, like, that they're in the past, don't be confused.
It's one thing for him to be... Like, when he meets a character, he knows to react a certain way. But when he's saying stuff like, oh, I didn't sleep with this woman, I just got here. It's like, no. Like, you know what just happened.
It's goofy, but not really all that big of a deal in the long run. It does feel weird, though. I will give you that.
So those three, they need to get Magneto, and in order to do that, they need to recruit the biggest talking point coming out of this movie in terms of new characters. Quicksilver, Evan Peters.
The biggest thing about this is that I've had to explain to my father 12 to 15 times that this Quicksilver is the same Quicksilver as in the Avengers Age of Ultron, and why they're not, and explain the mechanics of the contracts that allowed them to appear in both movies while not acknowledging that they're the same character in any way. It's fascinating stuff to explain to a 55-year-old man, I'll tell you that.
I do not doubt that. I am actually, I mean, we don't really need to get into the ins and outs of the contract situation, but I am genuinely surprised that there are such loopholes available. I would think all of this stuff would be ironclad, but yes, we do have him in both films. I think he's better because he doesn't have a bad Eastern European accent, and he's more fun.
It's like with that. It's like either hire a person from Eastern Europe or don't, make him American. Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, like, they do. They change his name from Pietro to Peter. They Americanize him up. They do weird stuff with his age. Whatever. It's for the better. It's a better character, in my opinion. But yeah, we get Quicksilver, who is just so much fun. I love that he is so annoying to all the other characters, but because he's so powerful, it's just a lot of sighing whenever he talks because they know they need him so much, but he annoys them so much.
Yeah, that was actually something. I remember I first read an interview when as soon as they announced Quicksilver was in it, everyone immediately read into it. Oh, this is Marvel. This is Fox just kind of fucking with Marvel a little bit. We're going to give them our Quicksilver before they give us their Quicksilver. And I was really worried because Bryan Singer said, well, I have this idea for an action scene with Quicksilver that I really want to do. And my eyes immediately rolled. Because one, that seems like a stupid reason to introduce a character in the first place. And two, Bryan Singer and action are not exactly two things I put together. And then they give the second best action scene in the history of X-Men.
Yes, so they break Magneto out of the prison and they are going through this kitchen, and in come the guards. Xavier can't stop them because his powers aren't working, so Quicksilver proceeds to run in what is to him slow motion, and we see him just mess around with objects in the kitchen, the guards, the trajectory of bullets, make them punch each other, steal hats, taste things, listen to music. It is beautiful from the way it's shot. The music is lovely. It's so fun. You could show this scene to anyone in the world, they would get it and like it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and also very tonally appropriate in this moment in time. We're still in the first half of the movie. We're not in a serious action scene. We know these cops are not about to kill the three main characters of the movie with their plastic bullets. And tone and this Quicksilver action scene is something to keep in mind when we come back to Apocalypse in 2 episodes, because I think Bryan Singer misread the tone of that scene when he did it again. So just bookmark that for now, people listening. And Evan Peters just nails it. And now Quicksilver's clearly one of the 4 or 5 most interesting characters in the franchise going forward, which is pretty much completely inexplicable. There's no reason to think that would ever happen.
No. Quicksilver's kind of a little... Quicksilver's not a nice character in the comics.
Yeah, and they definitely tease that Quicksilver is Magneto's son in this movie, but they also leave themselves enough wiggle room that they don't want to commit to that. They don't have to acknowledge it. This could be a Mystique Nightcrawler situation, or this could be they're actually dad and son. We'd of course get our answer in Apocalypse, but at this point they hedge their bets.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's exactly like Mystique and Nightcrawler. I think it's there to sort of wink and nod to people that know, and if you don't know, it doesn't really derail anything. Yeah, I like when they do things like that.
It's not like what we talk about, with the Sabretooth and Wolverine thing, where it's a big deal that they're meeting each other again, and Sabretooth should react like a human being in that situation.
Yeah.
And this, as I said, the introduction of Quicksilver was to release Magneto from prison, and Michael Fassbender, much like James McAvoy, kind of seamlessly steps back into the role, but this is also much like McAvoy's Charles Xavier is a different Eric Lencher. This is a more cynical Eric Lencher. This is a bit more attuned to the world. He's not so caught up in avenging his mother anymore. He's actually he has a political agenda of his own. And What's weird to me, though, is that... So the premise is that Magneto, he's in jail for allegedly killing John F. Kennedy, which would explain why the bullet curved and why there was a magic bullet. Instead of the magic bullet, they called it the curved bullet theory. So that implies that about a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Magneto was in Dallas to either, as he claims, prevent this from happening. So that means in the 12 months Magneto and Charles were gone, he saw Mystique grow to be this world-class assassin ass-kicker, right? Because for the line, you used to be a better shot, right? At the end of this movie.
Yeah, and when they have the conversation in the phone booth, they talk about, I've missed you, and
they've grown together personally and professionally, in the sense that their profession is being, villains for all intents and purposes.
I know where you're going with this, that they did all this in a year, but it's very possible that he was involved, but they didn't catch him for a long time.
Okay, but yes, but I do think it strains credulity that they did all this in a year, and Mystique went from being pretty physically incapable of contributing to the group beyond her power, to in 1 year being someone that Magneto recognizes as this basically world-class shot. When, on top of that, the whole premise of Mystique's arc is that in that year, and in the ensuing 9 years, she had never killed anybody. Why would he see her? Did we just miss 12 months of a 12-month montage of her training but not putting into action in any way? When we know that this Magneto in 1962 has no problem killing people. And there's many allusions to that, and many other characters reference the idea that, killing one there's that line from Mystique, killing one person was never enough for you. So were they just training literally for 12 months? What were they doing? That she become this world-class shot who never shot anybody, and then the ensuing 9 years also never killed anybody, at least on purpose.
I think they got caught up in writing a cool, fun line at the end, and in actuality, he had no idea how good of a shot she was.
Okay. It's heart of the movie is tied to the fact that Charles is not just saving the future, but also in a way saving Mystique. Because killing Trask put her on this path where she was experimented on, and any non-cynical thought she had in her head at that point would just evaporate upon that experience. And she would just become this kind of soulless, cold assassin that would serve at Magneto's whim for the rest of her life. So we're saying in that 10 years, she became this way without killing people? I'm not saying it's not possible, it just doesn't seem very plausible.
I mean, yeah, she is more sort of hardened, but they do constantly give you these little hints that it's kind of for show in some ways. She's not fully committed to it. She hesitates to kill. And
but that line about you used to be a better shot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that they just wrote what they thought was a cool line. Yeah. It shouldn't be there, but I think if you take that away, it still all holds together.
So they travel to France, and we didn't really talk about it much, but Jennifer Lawrence is kind of on a one-woman crusade to kill Trask and save as many mutants as possible, because, oh, by the way, all the mutants we got introduced to in the first film, besides Beast, Magneto, Xavier, and Mystique, are all dead.
Not Havoc, son.
Oh, I'm sorry, besides Havoc, Lucas Till, the glue that holds this franchise together, is still alive. But the rest of them are dead.
They're not just dead, just dead in passing.
But dead off screen. We see 2 pictures of them. We have 2 of them. We don't even get to see pictures of all of them. Because Trask has caught them and done experiments on them and killed them. And I feel like we were robbed of a proper sequel to First Class with this movie, and that always kind of brings it back to me. I mean, that knowledge that all these characters died off screen, that you felt like there was something there with some of them, were just kind of easily dispatched of in the name of making a much bigger, much more important movie, which is understandable, just kind of a little unfortunate, but what can you do?
Yeah, I think Simon Kinberg talks about all the time how he likes that they're going forward 10 years at a time because they can play with filling in the gaps, and I think this is an unfortunate side effect of that, is you're robbing people of what could be interesting stories.
Yeah. I would I know it's not practical to say, why not do both? But a lot of part of me feels like, all the things that happened in the past year seem pretty important. Seem like they would be pretty interesting stories. But we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So this should also lead us to talking about Trask, who is no longer Bill Duke in The Last Stand, which was the guy who played Oliver Trask there, but is Peter Dinklage. So
that's quite the transformation.
Yeah, I guess you can just write off saying there are two people in the world named Oliver Trask who are involved in the U.S. government and hunting mutants or whatever. I mean, that's very plausible. And I think if Kevin Bacon really made the most of Sebastian Shaw and turned it into something that was far more entertaining and important than it deserved, they kind of skipped that here. And didn't really even give... You realize how much more room Kevin Bacon was given to work with than when you see this movie, where Trask is kind of like this key component to the story, but he seems kind of like... he seems like he's almost off in his own movie, that they they kind of give token references to. Like for all intents and purposes, he doesn't even really need to be in the movie.
Yes, but I'm going to try and play devil's advocate here, as you like to do to me sometimes when I criticize. I think the idea with Trask is he's not necessarily the enemy, it's just he had the idea that brings about their real enemy. Like, he doesn't necessarily hate mutants, and he even says he doesn't hate them, he admires them. He's just pro-security. Like, he says, look, this dude can control metal, this woman can be anyone, this is a genuine concern, here's my solution to it. He's not out to exterminate mutants, he's not out to kill them, although Mystique does say things about how he's killed enough of our kind, but I just took that as just careless writing or whatever. But I get the sense that the man isn't so much important as what can become of his idea, because in killing him, his Sentinel program is implemented nationwide, and I think it's more about that. I think maybe that's why he's less of a big deal.
And I agree that the idea is... His ideas are the villain, not him. But one, I'd argue that's not terribly interesting. And two, they kind of split the difference where they kind of want to make you feel something about him but not actually commit to it.
I don't know. I think it's difficult to say here's the villain without trying to make him go mwahaha and make an evil finger pyramid and stuff. I think it's hard.
He's basically the equivalent. I mean, compare this to the portrayal of William Stryker, who felt like a fully realized character who you want to learn more about, and with Trask, it's kind of just he honestly could have literally not had a single line in the movie and it wouldn't have mattered.
Sure, I'm not sure I agree that it's less interesting if it's more about the idea than the man. I think it's a different take.
Interesting if you don't truly get to know the man. And Dinklage has a few scenes where he tries to give it a little something, and I actually really like the scene we're pretty much about to get to where he sees Mystique for the first time, and he's not scared, he's excited by the possibilities. That's how I read his face, and I thought that was a very interesting way to portray the character in that scene. But I don't know, he just doesn't get enough to do, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I don't know, it just felt like more should have been done with that, especially when you had an actor Peter Dinklage's quality, but oh well.
I kind of think he's ever so slightly overrated, but I don't want to get shot, so we're not going to talk about that at length.
All right, let's move on from that. And I guess this kind of brings us to Mystique's arc in the story, because she's kind of the key to a lot of what's going on, not just in terms of plot, but her decision at the end dictates basically the future of the Earth for all intents and purposes. I really like how they marginalize her screen time here. she's not in this movie a ton. I'd be curious to know what the exact figures are, but it feels like she's off in her own movie that's only like 15 minutes long.
Yeah, in my head, she was in it a lot more than this.
Really? Oh, wow. It was always noticeable to me that she was barely in this movie because, and for those who don't know, in 2011 when First Class came out, I think we were still like a month away from the first Hunger Games movie. And then by the time this one comes out in 2014, I think at least 2 of them have come out, if not more. So like she's a pretty big star by this point. She's probably been nominated for 2 or 3 Oscars at this point.
Had Silver Linings come out? I think it had.
Yeah. Silver Linings had come out. I think so. I guess that's 2, and then her 3rd Oscar nomination came out later this year for that really, really boring movie, American Hustle.
Well, she, she went from being this actress you might have heard of from that film Winter's Bone to J-Lo. Like, she's a huge A-list star now, and
like she's the quote-unquote it girl of this time period, and she's kind of stuck in this contract where she has to keep making these movies, essentially.
Kind of, like, yes and no. I get the sense she enjoys it while she's doing it, but she doesn't like having to... I think, like the Marvel films, I think they like making them. I just think they would like to not have to make them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So they kind of... what I would say is they wisely marginalize her screen time while theoretically taking advantage of her star power by centering the movie around her choice at the end. I think she actually has an interesting story here in the sense that after, feeling so burned out with Charles's worldview for so long that only a year of being with Eric kind of really, really damaged her and put her in this very unpredictable place.
You keep saying this. We don't know it was a year.
So you think Eric was captured, like he wasn't smart enough to evade capture after he shot the president?
No, I'm saying he was smart enough to evade capture and they didn't get him for several years.
But he was that. He actually says in the movie, the last time I saw her was before I went to Dallas.
Oh. Yeah, okay. Right, fine. 1 year, sloppy, bad storytelling, too much happened in a year, I bow out.
I think that clearly only having a year of Eric kind of puts her in this unpredictable place where she doesn't know exactly who she is, but she kind of wants to inherently reject Charles, but she's only seen a sliver of what Magneto's capable of, I guess, or something. So I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting.
Maybe they were hoping that not everyone consciously knew the amount of time between the Cuban Missile Crisis and the JFK assassination.
Yeah, But
maybe they were taking some poetic license and being like, oh, yeah, all that time. Shit, it's only a year. Fuck.
And I like that she is... I think, the scene when Charles finds her in the airport is so beautiful. Like, she's actually pretty terrible in the scene in terms of acting, but Charles is so strong that it doesn't matter. But basically, it's like where Charles kind of accidentally says, you have to come home. It's like after all this time, you're still just trying to tell me what to do. And it's a little cliche and trite that she's kind of having a tantrum at him and is deciding to kill people as a result. But I think it's very, very beautifully and believably done.
Yeah, it's he says all that stuff and that's the only thing she heard. Or it doesn't matter what else you said, once she heard that, you lost the argument. And
then it once again leads to what I would say another beautiful scene at the end where he kind of projects himself once again in front of Oliver Trask and kind of just says, you know what, you were right. And I could stop you right now if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. Our fate rests in your hands, and she chooses to do the right thing. I think is a moment they kind of nailed, despite the super sketchiness of the idea that somehow her not killing him then after Magneto pulled what he pulled, they decide to not make the Sentinels in the future or something like that. But
yeah, 100%. Magneto does the biggest thing he's ever done, basically.
It's a little sketchy. It's a little sketchy. But but James McAvoy sells it so hard that you kind of are able to push that from the back of your mind enough to not be annoyed about it.
He's so good. He conveys so much emotion all the time. It's
really great in this movie. It's unfair that he's not lauded more for his work in general in these movies, because he really nails it. And I guess this takes us, so, whatever, Magneto makes an impromptu, rash decision to just kill Mystique for some reason when they went to go stop her from killing Trask, and that predictably blows up in all their faces, and Mystique gets away. They get the blood from her anyway. Now Eric and Charles and Beast and Wolverine are separated because, Magneto went rogue on them. And it's a weird, it's a rush scene, but I guess it gets them to where they need to go. Did they ever reconcile the fact that they end up with her DNA anyway?
Well, he only has a small amount. He says how he needs spinal fluid, brain tissue, bone marrow. I agree, I think. I mean, maybe because it's like a speck that's come off the floor, it's not a good enough sample, but I agree. If they have her blood, they should be able to do whatever they need.
Now, is there a way he could get all those things without killing her?
Nope.
I am not a doctor, but that sounds very unlikely. So, which makes me wonder, I mean, again, so many of the X-Men quote-unquote plot holes, you can very easily explain them away. He gets just enough to make these Super Sentinels, or whatever, his team, because he's dead at this point. His team gets just enough to make these Super Sentinels, but Eric rescues her in time or something like that. You can easily explain it away, but it's very, it seems very odd. Anyway, so everyone's separated now. Mystique's determined to kill Trask more than ever. Eric's decided that it's the time to strike. He needs to do something big. And Charles is at his lowest moment ever. Beast is a useless figure as always. Wolverine has no idea what to do. And Wolverine kind of has this big moment where he convinces James McAvoy to search inside Wolverine's head and find future Charles Xavier. So we have this really wonderful scene where Patrick Stewart basically psychs James McAvoy up. And again, so goofy. The logic behind it is sketchy at best, but the acting really kind of saves it. It makes you not really care about that. Which, again, goes back to my theory about X-Men is that, when it's good, it doesn't matter how stupid it is.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing in a world of comic book characters and superheroes and weird contrived plots, so it's always going to have an element of silly even when it's good, but it's so much more forgivable when it is good than when it's bad.
So, McAvoy's got his mojo back. Him, Beast, and Wolverine go to DC because they figure out that's where Mystique's going to kill Trask, and Magneto has decided that the most efficient way to do what he's going to do is to lift up a baseball stadium, which seems, I wouldn't say beyond his powers, but the physics of it doesn't really make sense to me. But whatever. Surround the White House, but in the meantime, he's also taken control of the Sentinels by putting metal in them, which again, I can understand how he physically controls the robots.
Yeah.
Seems to be controlling them though, from their in terms of their actual controls and orders.
Yeah, he should be able to put metal in them and move them like puppets, physically move their parts. But they are clearly electronically working, and he's he doesn't have electronic he doesn't understand programming.
It's you can't just shove metal into a computer and then dictate what that computer's going to do without having incredible knowledge of the inner workings of computers. And once again, you can explain that away with something, I'm sure, but we don't have that something, so it just seems stupid.
Yeah, if this is some version of Magneto that's a genius computer programmer, engineer, whatever, fine, but we know it's not, so...
Yeah. So, Magneto, has this big moment, and he basically announces to the world that you got scared and you came after us, so now I'm going to send you all a message. And once it leads to a really awkward fight scene, because Sentinels are basically giant robots where the only thing that you can do is shoot stuff at them. Ideally, optic beams coming from eyes, exploding cards, maybe lightning, people who can fly and pick them up. So, scrawny Beast and Bone Claws Wolverine fighting Sentinels is the least appealing option possible. And the fact that there's a decent chance that the only cinematic adventures of the classic Sentinels fighting the X-Men is pretty depressing. Because this is the trademark scene from the cartoon series as kids. They were, I assume, a fairly big part of the comic books at one point. And, like, there are so many interesting ways to fight them, and they literally have the least interesting version of that fight possible. Because, like, Wolverine can't do anything about it. Like, he's got bone claws. Like, these bone claws are useless against, plastic robots, I guess. And, Beast is just not really, he's just kind of a physical, he's like it's like an ape trying to tackle a giant robot. It just doesn't really visually do anything for you.
Even Cartoon Jubilee was better against Sentinels than these guys.
Iceman would be better. Mystique probably wouldn't be better, but she could be doing some Legolas shit or something, and, like, I'm sure it'd be better than what this is. By this point, Xavier's back in the wheelchair, so he's kind of useless, and it doesn't really matter because that's not what this scene was about, but boy, it just shows how little common sense Bryan Singer has sometimes when it comes to shooting action, that he could just put together the least visually stimulating one possible.
Well, I think the only way this isn't, like, an absolute disaster is they intercut it with the Future Sentinels, and that is a much more slick visual affair.
A very forced interaction with William Stryker causes Wolverine subconscious to do whatever the fuck, and he accidentally stabs Kitty Pryde in the future. So now there's a lot of tension there. The Sentinels have caught their scent for reasons that were not clear in your theatrical cut, but I guess we're logical all the same because they throw in that line, "They always find us." And now the future X-Men are making one last desperate stand against all these giant robots. Thousands of giant robots, by the way. So while in the past then, Magneto rather cleverly dispatches of Wolverine in a way that, one, I thought was just really fun. Like, he puts a bunch of metal in him, actually, and then tosses him into the water. And I really love the visual of how small Wolverine looked when he fell into that water, like that small splash. Like, I just thought that was so perfect.
Well, that's Magneto's trademark, taking the biggest, baddest X-Man there is and making him look like a small child. Like, I love how easily he just sort of makes little head motions. He doesn't even, like, move his hand when he's trying to mess with him. He just takes him down so easily.
Yeah. And I think Bryan Singer's really good about those small moments where, like Michael Bay would take this moment and turn it into a clusterfuck, but, like, basically, like, it's like he just dropped a stone in the water, basically. And it's really pitch perfect. And also, it kind of also, like, wisely signals to the fact that, this story is really not about Wolverine. He's just kind of the vessel to get people into the seats in a lot of ways, in the movie and in real life in terms of getting people to the theater. So Magneto is about to do what he does. A Sentinel comes after him because, Magneto has released whatever. A Sentinel comes to attack him, and Mystique reveals herself and shoots him in the neck with a plastic bullet. Just enough to take him down, but not enough to kill him because she's that good of a shot, despite the fact that she has no evidence, no experience killing people. Whatever. And then we had that beautiful, touching scene with Xavier projecting himself in front of Trask and telling, as we said, Mystique, telling her she has his choice. Meanwhile, everything has gone to shit in the future. Basically, all the New Mutants are dead. Storm is killed in, like, the biggest cheer moment possible for X-Men fans because Halle Berry was so bad as Storm. Kitty's about to die. She can barely hold on. Magneto is probably on his deathbed in the sense that he got a piece of shrapnel got him in the chest. He couldn't block one piece of it. Blink is taken out. Bishop is taken out fairly early. Iceman tries to make one last desperate save. He's gone. Colossus is ripped in half. They're all dead. They're all about to die in the future, which would, I guess kill Wolverine? I don't know. But at the very last second, Mystique decides not to shoot Oliver Trask. So in theory, the idea is that this was the mutants coming out party to the world, and the narrative became, no, Hitler mutant did not kill the president. Instead, this blue mystical mutant saved everybody. I'll say this: I like studying narratives and how arbitrary they are and how arbitrary they take hold of the world. It is perfectly plausible that would be the narrative coming out in the sense that it doesn't make any sense, but things that don't make any sense take hold of narratives all the time. it just seems so unlikely that will be the take-home message the world had from that. I mean, Magneto literally took a baseball stadium and dropped it around the White House and undermined every human technology designed to take out the mutants single-handedly.
Yeah, like, he brought about, he should have narratively brought about more than Mystique would ever have accomplished by shooting one dude.
Yeah, and it's sketchy. It's very sketchy. It does not add up. It's a stretch to say the least, and I'd say it's definitely a weakness of the story. But the emotion and the pathos in that scene is so strong, you kind of shrug it off, or at least you have to decide if you want to shrug it off or not. I think you and I both kind of shrug it off at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's your big finale set piece extravaganza moment. You're putting Magneto back on the side of evil again. He was only tenuously on the side of good for a few minutes, so I don't know. They're a slave to the machine. They have to do this.
Yeah, I think there had to be far more clever ways of doing this that don't ask more questions than they answer. But I think overall it works. Mostly, I think McAvoy sells it. I think McAvoy sells it so well that it works.
Yeah, so good. As he just stands there in front of her with tears in his eyes, just saying, whatever happens, it's your choice. So good.
And, as you said in the summary, like, we cut to Logan waking up in the future, the now not desolate future. And we learned that in this timeline, that is now the only timeline, Jean Grey and Scat are still alive. Everyone's still alive. The school seems in like this weird dream-like lighting space for some reason, but whatever. Definitely does not feel like the afterlife at all. I don't know why they would tease that, but probably by accident.
I think Bryan Singer said that it was advice he got from James Cameron to momentarily make it seem like it was all a dream, just to mess with people. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's kind of interesting. I thought it was just to signal like how like disoriented Logan must feel in that moment, but it definitely had this dream-like quality quality to the scene, every scene he had.
Yeah, and like if you look when he first wakes back up, that bit especially feels like oh, maybe he was dreaming. I think the rest of it is, as you said, just meant to be, he's disorientated. And
actually, he and Patrick Stewart have that really nice moment at the end that you just, if anything, like so much of this movie makes you long for what could have been with the original cast because they deserve such a better ending than they got. And it's just been so unfortunate what happened to that. Because we'll never be able to look back on the original cast with the, like, there's always going to be a caveat because the third one sucks so badly. But,
this whole thing is just a giant apology for the non-Singer X-Men films.
Basically. Speaking of that, they do this little thing at the end where, Logan, was dropped in the water. He's rescued by this mysterious ship, and it seems like Stryker has him. So you kind of feel like, oh, this got tied up all neatly. But it's not Stryker, it's Mystique.
Yeah.
And this felt like a nice little curveball moment to end the movie, and nothing happens with it, which is very odd. Maybe we should save that conversation for Apocalypse, but once again, it's kind of like how the first movie ended with these series of moments that we kind of just erased by the time the sequel rolled around, and I don't know if that was the right decision or not.
I think literally the only reason they made it Mystique was they didn't want it to be too predictable and have it just neatly be Stryker.
Yeah. It's not that... to me, the notion that they would tell Wolverine's story without him becoming Wolverine through Stryker, I think would have been foolish. But at the same time, it seems like nothing was changed by that at the same time. Like, I don't know. That it feels like a cop-out. Like, ooh, you want to do this cool ending, but you don't want it to actually mean anything. So that's an exhaustive rundown of Days of Future Past. I mean, you basically gave a summary, and then I gave an exhaustive analysis of every scene.
It was good, though.
Yeah. Should we transition to the road cut, or is there anything else we need to tackle about this movie?
It depends how nerdy you want to get about time travel.
I think the path they chose for time travel was smart. Like, we don't need multiple timelines. We don't need any of that.
Well, my only issue is are we led to believe it all played out in real time? Like, every minute he spends in the past, he has to be kept still in the future. Like, they had to sit there while he was sleeping in the past. We see him sleep at least once. They have to sit there while he's on a plane in the past. Like, it seems a bit weird that they would expect Kitty to just sit there, kneeling, holding him there for literally days.
The risk of sounding like an apologist, when you're in that future dystopian hellscape, you've probably done things like that a lot.
Sure, that's just a Tuesday, you know?
Like, you probably have done, like, ridiculously strenuous things that you would never think were humanly possible.
Okay.
Like, you probably have stayed up, like, 72 hours, like, at that point.
I just maybe if I'm Xavier, I'm looking in on what's happening and I'm going, yo, Logan, there's literally no time to sleep. Get on this.
It's problematic in terms of storytelling, to say the least.
Yeah. But that's just me being super nitpicky about time travel, which is always, you can sit there and unravel any time travel story all you want. Whatever. It's good.
Time travel stories are such a mess. It's hard to...
But they're always fun, almost always.
Probably not always, but...
Okay, I like them. I have a penchant for time travel stories.
Okay, the road cut.
The road cut, in my opinion, a far superior cut of the film. Tell me why it isn't.
Mostly, I think it brings the movie to a screeching halt, just as the theatrical version is like diving into the climax headfirst. And in particular, the scenes with Beast and Mystique are so incomprehensibly bad.
That's one scene.
It's two scenes at the very least. So, I mean, it's basically like this. It's like the reason why Mystique decided to come back to the mansion in the middle of the night, hope that only Beast would hear her, hope no one else would hear her, was to destroy Cerebro, which would prove to be basically rendered completely meaningless because they were able to find her anyway 10 seconds later. It's such a dumb scene, and it just really slows the movie down for reasons that are not in any way justified.
Sure, like, I'm not going to say every minute they cut out, every minute that is added back in for the road cut is golden.
This is a significant addition, though. And it's a significantly dumb addition to the movie. If let's just say they added, let's just accept that these two scenes are bad, objectively, because they are.
Yeah.
It came in the early portion of the movie. You could say they easily just like recovered from it, and it's something you forget about by the end. It is jarring when you watch it in the context of, wow, we should be getting all geared up for the climax now. Boom. I'm conflicted about the scene with the rescue of Rogue. I
think it's really cool seeing young and old Magneto doing stuff at the same time.
That is done exceptionally well. Really, really well done. My concern, once again, is that I believe, I haven't listened to the commentaries, but I believe what the intention was to give Xavier and Magneto one last adventure together. And the reason why they took it out in the end was that having Kitty near death did more for the tension of the final scenes than to have Rogue come in and kind of erase that tension in that scene. I get that, although I don't think that's actually the biggest issue. The biggest issue for me is that they're doing this because Kitty can't hold on to Logan anymore. She's lost too much blood. She's been too weakened. So they have to bring Rogue in to finish the job. Okay. Kitty is still, rescues Magneto. After this. She's still there. She's still talking. Okay, yes, using her power would exert her energy far more, but, I think maybe if, Kitty had died, shortly thereafter that, maybe after she just heard Bobby died, maybe it would feel a little bit more justified. If they didn't do this, then the whole plan would have fallen apart right before they had their last chance to save the world. It was when Kitty jumped out of the door to rescue Magneto instead of Blink teleporting him away, I was, in shock. I couldn't believe they just completely undercut the entire motivation for doing that in the first place. And I don't think... And also, they're in this dystopian future where, they seriously must have gotten, developed cold blood by this point. And Magneto lets those scientists go so they can warn people. Come the fuck on.
Does he?
He lets them go, right?
He lets them leave that room.
And I think streamlining the movie so that the majority of it takes place in the past is less fan servicey in the sense that like you desperately want more with the future and original cast, but I think it's better service to the story to just kind of focus on the characters that actually have the arc in this movie.
But I did want more of the future people.
Because you're a fanboy.
Fine, but I also think the past stuff, while a lot of it is good, is also more boring.
Yeah.
I get why they took this out. Like, there's bits here and there that they add in that I vehemently believe they should have left in. But the majority of this is one large chunk of a scene, which is what we're talking about here with them rescuing Rogue and the really bad Beast Mystique scenes. Like, that's an easy, you can just take this out, throw it away, the film still works. So I get why they did it. But I do still prefer this version of the film.
Everything else about the Rogue cut does make the movie better, I'd say.
Yeah.
But these are the two most important things in the Rogue cut, and they're awful. Or they're needless. They're awful and needless.
I'd say one's awful, the other one is just convenient to remove.
Hence the word needless.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff in here you could take out, like, from the past stuff.
Like, it doesn't come off like a moment. I mean, in part because he's not a very good actor. There's just so little attachment to him that it just felt forced and rushed, so, like, it just didn't, I don't know.
Who's that, sorry?
Bobby's,
oh, right. No, see, this is the thing I was going to say. I mean, I know he's still not, like, he's not going to be contending for Oscars, but I think he has grown slightly as an actor. Like, he's a slightly more competent actor in the years since those first 3 X-Men movies. And while he's not amazing, but I think the few extra scenes they give him here, like, they give more time to the relationship with Kitty, which is nice, and, like, you feel for them when one of them dies, and, like, when she's wounded and feels bad. I think you do see a little bit more of his growth as an actor and as a character. Like, he's a semi-leader for this little ragtag group, and at the beginning, when he's passing by Kitty and Bishop, like, they share this little look, and then he's riding the ice wave, and I don't know, I think he's a much better character than he'd been in the rest of it. And I know that's a very low bar, but...
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This is what I'll say. I love that there are kind of two distinct versions of this movie, and we have access to both of them. Like, I think that's awesome, and I love that, like, I just love that exists. Like, because this version of the movie is pretty distinctly different in some key ways that...
yeah, that is a very large plot divergence, like, from them finding Mystique through Cerebro to her showing up there, destroying Cerebro, and then finding her anyway, bringing Rogue in, having Rogue replace Kitty. Like, yeah, and Iceman dying way earlier than he does in the... Like, he's holding them off. He's the last defense at the end. And he's absent completely in the Rogue cut, but... Yeah,
and like I said, like, I think that's really cool. And I almost wish more movies had enough subplots that could be conveniently X'd out, and then we have two... Like, I think just the fact that we have two versions of this movie is pretty cool in general.
But that's a pretty dangerous path to start walking down, because, I mean... like,
I'm not indicating that you write the movie, that it works out that way. I'm just saying...
Yeah.
I think that makes me like looking back at this movie even more is that there's actually a second version we can look at and kind of analyze to see which one is more effective.
Yeah. I don't know. I think in a world where there isn't the theatrical cut, I think this is... I don't know. It's hard because, like you said, yeah, that is kind of derailing. I think maybe they could have done something to sort of interlay it more gradually throughout, rather than just smash it all in one location.
I think if they more consistently cut back to the future and build to that moment, it works far better. And then you can just take out the Mystique and B scenes, and possibly you have a better overall movie than the theatrical cut. It's definitely better than the Rogue cut as it stands now, for sure.
Yeah, I struggle to say, hey, you should buy this movie twice. I'm obviously a crazy person who owns...
So wait, the Rogue cut DVD does not come with the original?
It does. But it came out after. I bought Days of Future Past when it came out. I'm so insane, I bought the 3D version just because it had a cooler front cover. I paid extra money for a front cover. So I'm not saying if you hypothetically own Days of Future Past on DVD, you should go out and rush out and buy the Rogue cut. I don't know how many people did. It's been out a while now. I would say if you hadn't seen the film before, I personally think that's the version you should watch. If you're a crazy, insane fanboy like me, it's the version you should watch. But I do see what you're saying about it being quite jarring. And also, yes, again, we'll say it 100 times if we need to, the Beast Mystique stuff is bad.
I was baffled. Like, I thought there was going to be I thought the nurse shoe was going to drop and we were going to find out this was a dream or some vision. Like, the acting was so bad. At this point, I guess, were these two still together by this point in real life? Like, whatever. There's that joke in, I think it was actually a joke popularized by Friends of all places, where it's like, if you see two actors on screen with a ton of sexual chemistry, they haven't started sleeping with each other yet, but once they're with each other, the chemistry's all gone. And, like, maybe that's what happened here, because this was just awful. Like, it felt like a scene where, like, Xavier is being manipulated by Jason Stryker. Like, that's, like, the level of acting going on in this moment. And I don't know. I think you should watch the theatrical cut first, but you should definitely watch the road cut, in part just to see how awful Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult are. And also, it's like the notion that she would go back, like, and also Xavier's powers are back by this point, and he doesn't pick up on her present. Like, it's dumb. It's very, very dumb.
It is. I like it more for...
I do think we touched on to a point, though, was that it would be cool if there was a version of this movie that cuts back to the future a little bit more and builds to that climax more, instead of just kind of dropping it and rushing it a bit at the end.
It would have made it a lot harder for them to cut it out as well. Like, you know, you could have had Kitty get stabbed earlier. Well, she can only get stabbed as early as, you know, Wolverine freaks out. But, you know, you could be like, okay, we need to go get Rogue, and then 20 minutes later they start going to get Rogue, and then 20 minutes later they're getting Rogue.
What was so jarring to me was that as soon as she gets stabbed in this movie, I expected that to start coming together much sooner. And it really, like, it felt like they waited the exact same amount of time to cut Back to the Future as they did the cut.
It's really weird. There are loads of very...
It's disappointing that Wolverine does not get to fight anybody in this movie with the metal claws, because that is really fun to watch usually.
Yeah,
that's something that didn't strike me as much until this time, when I realized I don't know, something about watching the road cut maybe crystallized that he doesn't really get to be fighting Wolverine in this movie.
Yeah, he's really just
there.
He's like the narrative drive, because he's the one that brings them the information, but he's not a huge amount of use after that.
Yeah, he's kind of just along for the ride. I mean, he's in all the scenes with the protagonist. It's not like they leave him anywhere, but it's fascinating to go watch. And that also gets to our point, though, that we've talked about a lot, whereas Wolverine is this great, fascinating character. You just don't need to make him the center of everything you do in the X-Men universe. And I think this was like the perfect balance between that. And it's a shame that, I don't know.
He didn't stab more people.
It's a shame he didn't stab more people, but it's also a shame that he's not going to go out. Like, Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine is not going to go out in a similar fashion. You know, in some ways, this would have been like the perfect end of Hugh Jackman's run of Wolverine.
Yeah, it was almost like a swan song. Like, look, there you go. You've lived all this terrible stuff, but everything's fine. All the stuff that happened to you almost has been erased. He's just a teacher at a school until he's even older.
Yeah, and like I said, like, it makes me want more Wolverine. It makes me want more of the original cast. I just know they're going in the wrong direction, and that the original cast will not be there, and we're just getting a Wolverine movie. It's just so dumb. Okay, so here's my question now, because we've teased this question a few times. Do you think this movie was good enough that it was worth doing at the expense of just not building up this new cast, building up this new version of X-Men, and kind of just ignoring the original? Because the existence of this movie kind of forces, like, one, erases like 80% of the cast from the first class. It doesn't lock them into certain future, but into like the first class trilogy into a certain future, but it forces them to acknowledge that all these characters grow into all these other characters, and that all these characters that we've met so far exist in this timeline. Was that necessary?
Well, I think part of this is how many of that new First Class cast that we lost would you actually have wanted to save?
And I think that's a totally fair question. And I think the only character that does not appear in this one, but is not killed off, is Rose Byrne's, Moira McTaggart, and they wisely keep her alive and bring her back for Apocalypse. Like, you know, it's not so much that I wanted more of that cast, other than the fact that Azazel was fucking awesome, and I would love to watch more Azazel. It's more just that I would kind of like to see that version of the franchise grow without the burden of knowing that it's connected to the original characters, the original portrayal of the characters. At the same time, like, even just rewatch, that's what I've started thinking after, like, watching Apocalypse and rewatching all these other movies, but now after seeing Days of Future Past, like, I don't like the idea of giving this movie up for anything. But it's still, I think, it's just a shame we couldn't get this movie and kind of the First Class version of the franchise unburdened by its connection to the original.
I don't know, it's hard. I mean, you can't...
I don't think you could do both without it in the current cinematic climate. Because you can't make, like... You're not going to make 5 or 6 movies with Fassbender, McAvoy, and Jennifer Lawrence. Like, you're just not going to do it. It's just not feasible. So it's kind of like the iron... It was the time to strike with Days of Future Past, and they understandably took that chance and did that. Part of me is always going to wonder what it would have been like just to see... I'm sorry. Part of me is always going to wonder what it would have been like to see Matthew Vaughn's version of X-Men grow out more organically and at a more natural rate. Like, just his idea alone for how to start the sequel to First Class of just, like, watching Magneto curve the bullet just, like, was so fascinating to me. I love Bryan Singer's work with X-Men. I just kind of wish we could have Bryan Singer's work with X-Men going forward and Matthew Vaughn's.
Absolutely, and I don't know, they could... I think it's hard because so much plays into this beyond just that pure creative question of here's Matthew Vaughn, here's Bryan Singer. I think Marvel has a lot to do with this. I think them wanting to scale up and go big and go huge plays into this. I don't know if Matthew Vaughn could make that film. He probably could. He's a good director, but...
And also, like, Matthew Vaughn clearly is someone who just kind of goes what he thinks is the right thing to do for him in that moment. Like, he just is like, I'd rather make Kingsman than Days of Future Past, which is kind of a bewildering decision on paper. But also, Kingsman is probably just as good as a movie as Days of Future Past.
It's pretty fun.
So I just, like, it's not that cut and dry. It's just, to me, I think there is this notion that it's like DC feels like they can only make one version of Batman right now, and it's the version that Zack Snyder has given birth to. And to me, it's like, well, why don't we have someone who's, like, making a very serious Batman, and, like, not just like the Christopher Nolans, but kind of in that similar vein. But then we have a Batman that's more tone appropriate for the fact that he's, like, in this goofy intergalactic world now that doesn't make any sense for Batman to be in. Why don't we have Matthew Vaughn more fast-paced, more don't ask questions, look the other way while we're running through all these great funny scenes, and Bryan Singer's a bit more cerebral, a bit slower paced, a bit more not character driven, but slower, more worldy version of the world.
Sure, I think the problem is they needed to do this then.
This was probably the only time they could make this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's Singer stepping back up and be like, look, my bad. Here's my love letter to the old films. Here's where I think we're going in the future. I love what Matthew Vaughn did. Here's what I'm going to do with his ideas. I absolutely think it would be great to see Matthew Vaughn come back and do another First Class style film, but I think this could only have happened then, and I think it was a good thing for the overall franchise.
Yeah, I after watching again last night, I agree. But I think it was worth discussing just because I was developing doubts as I was watching the other movies.
Yeah,
it's just First Class just has that magic and energy to it that I think X-Men needs right now.
Yeah, and like we'll get into this going forward, but I think there are going to be the Singer-style films that are huge, and I think there are going to be. They probably won't be of the quality of First Class, but I think they are going to try and do something of that kind of tone.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's a fascinating movie. It's once again, it definitely feels like the first two X-Men movies where you watch it and be like, how does anyone prefer Iron Man to this movie? How does anyone prefer the Sam Raimi Spider-Man to this movie? It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like to sound like just like a petty, fanboy of X-Men, but like I guess I am, because it just doesn't make any sense to me that someone would prefer a lot of really objectively average and dumb superhero movies to the first two and Days of Future Past. I just don't understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult for me because I do have this. There are only like really three characters that when I see them appear on screen have given me this sort of joyous feeling. I mean, one is when I see Spider-Man done really well, like I did in Civil War, I was just grinning ear to ear. When I saw Deadpool in his proper suit doing all that was good. And then it's every X-Men character. Like, these three... I'm not even a huge Deadpool fan, but these three characters, for whatever reason, elicit more of an emotional response from me just seeing them on the screen than Iron Man ever will, than Hulk ever will, anyone like that. So I do have that bias, but at the same time, rewatching these and seeing just how good X-Men 1 and 2 are, seeing how good First Class is, seeing how good this is, I don't see how there can be much of an argument that these aren't better than the majority of superhero films.
It would be nice, like, even if you just, like, look at what, and we will have a whole episode about what X-Men movies are coming, there is clearly still, like, there still just isn't one person in charge dictating everything and making sure everything makes sense. And I think that is a huge part of the problem, like, where people just, I don't know, it's because the franchise is not woven tightly, like, people just, their mood is just easily swayed by, I don't know, there's just not there's no enthusiasm for X-Men, and I don't think that's warranted or fair in any way.
I don't think people were hard enough on the franchise after Last Stand and Origins Wolverine and The Wolverine. Like, they got very lucky that they got away with making those three films.
Yeah, but which is so weird. Like I said, like, I mean, like, I'm sure, like, we could, like I said, Rotten Tomatoes is not a perfect score, but how does Apocalypse have worse reviews than The Last Stand and The Wolverine?
I don't know. There is this weird... coming back to Suicide Squad, I don't know why that one was singled out. I don't know why Apocalypse was singled out. But they were.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that, like, there's this big Marvel conspiracy where people are just aggressively anti-DC, Fox, Sony, everything else, but... I mean, Marvel allegedly cannot put a foot wrong, and people are not giving enough praise to these other films, so...
I mean, I'm a little suspicious of your thoughts on Suicide Squad, but...
it's not...
Subject
it's not great.
Podcast or Skype discussion. But I just don't... I don't know. Once again, this movie just makes me get... Like, it's like when X-Men movies do well, like, they don't get enough credit, and when they do badly... people don't shit on them enough. And then that somehow ended up at this point where people are sick of them and just, like, people are suggesting, well, why are they still making X-Men movies? It's like, because most of them are good.
Yeah.
And they've all been financially successful, I think.
I mean, I think if you stack up their entire canon of work and you compare it with Marvel's, with Sony's, with DC's,
there is no comparison.
Yeah. I
mean, at this point, I was not a huge fan of Deadpool, but I did enjoy it. I would give it like a thumbs up.
Yeah.
That means 6 of the 9 movies in the X-Men universe are, I don't want to say universally good, because obviously people did not like Apocalypse, but
those people are crazy.
Like, it's just, I just can't. I can't explain it.
I don't think you can fuck with the X-Men's ratio of good to bad. I just don't.
But
fine, they did The Last Stand. Fine, they did Origins Wolverine. But they did X-Men. They did X2.
It's also like the people like complaining about those movies now were not hard enough on them when they came out.
Yeah, like how they came out so long ago now, and it's weird. I guess there is some sort of Marvel over everything bias going on. I don't know.
I don't want to like simplify it to that. I
don't either, because I like all of this stuff, but
I just think. I don't know. It's like people like, for instance, like the build up to Apocalypse was not inspiring. The trailers were not really all that good. Apocalypse is kind of a dumb villain. And And it's like people convinced themselves this movie wasn't needed or wasn't good before they even saw it. And like it wasn't good enough. It just wasn't good enough to override the lack of enthusiasm for X-Men in general.
Yeah, and I don't think this film got enough praise.
Days of Future Past?
Yeah.
It wasn't universally praised, but I mean, when you consider in general, there weren't a lot of like if you're open-minded about comic book movies, it seemed like it was well reviewed, and it obviously financially did very well.
Yeah,
but it didn't feel like a happening. It definitely didn't feel like a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. But
that's kind of arbitrary too, because it made internationally just about as much money as Deadpool, and Deadpool obviously did feel significant and like a big deal. So I don't know.
Well, that was
how much of that is just like our anecdotal evidence skewing our sense of reality.
I think we'll talk about we will talk about Deadpool very soon.
Literally next, right?
Yeah,
that's the next one.
So that's what we're left with. We have this big course correction. We've allowed for them to pick and choose with the timeline going forward. We've had this big budget, big cast, financially successful. While it may not be universally praised, I don't think there's a lot of criticism out there for it. And we are left with a teaser of Apocalypse in the post-credits.
Yes.
I personally think it was... I don't know. Like, I get that
I actually
in the world...
forgot to watch that.
Oh, okay.
But based on my memory of it, like, it didn't look anything like the Apocalypse we saw in Apocalypse, right?
No, he's impossible to... Oh, you mean in the film? Oh, not really, no.
And did you see the alternate mid-credit scene in the road cut? It's just Peter Dinklage in a beard in Magneto's cell.
Why?
So there's this newspaper headline that he was arrested for selling military secrets.
Why is he put in a plastic prison underneath the...
It just like it's one of those things where it's just like I'm sure it's kind of like that line. You used to be a better shot. Where it's just like I see why you thought this was funny, but it doesn't really make any sense.
Well, I guess that's why you put it in the credits and not... Yeah. If anything, they should have put this at the very end of the credits.
Yes, it didn't make any sense to me. Yeah.
But the Apocalypse thing, like...
X-Men movies have not really been good at after credit scenes, so...
Yeah. I get that they feel that in this world where Marvel are tacking on big, significant post-credit sequences, they need to, like, bring something bigger. So they go, well, here's our second most iconic villain. Here's your teaser for that. But I think it was too soon. Like, I think you needed to do a mainline X-Men film of a smaller scale in between Future Past and Apocalypse. So I had mixed feelings about this tease.
Yeah, I don't understand why they rushed that out for no reason.
Either way, that's where we're left after this film. So we're going to see you next time for Deadpool. And in the meantime, go to our Facebook page, go to our YouTube page, our SoundCloud, enter the real world, 411 Mania. Everywhere you can find this. Mike and Matt's Excellent Adventures. Please leave all the feedback in the world. Tell us we're stupid and we argue too much about tiny little insignificant plot details if you want. We probably won't listen anyway, but still, we encourage you to do that. And you can also get at me personally on Twitter at Matt C. Waters. You can get at Mike at
MC Thomas 216.
I hope you're ready for the mutt with the mouth. Deadpool is up next. Bye, everybody.